Okay, we welcome you in. It is the Everything Guide to Sports Betting right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Of course, it's Betting 101. We go back to basics. And a concept today as we welcome in the author of the Everything Guide to Sports Betting, Josh Appelbaum. It is obviously something we've touched on as far as a concept, but we're going to dive deep into both behind the book with VSiN Vinny, Mr. Vinny Magliulo. We're going to approach this from many different angles because it's so important as a component, and that is bankroll management.
Bankroll management is one of the most critical and important factors to becoming a successful long-term sports bettor. And it really centers around the question, how much should you bet on each game? One of the biggest mistakes that a new bettor can make is being reckless with their bankroll. Betting a lot of money on one game because they're very confident versus maybe betting less on a lean when they're less confident. However, you never want to bet just based on gut instinct or recency bias. You want to have a consistent, disciplined, long-term bankroll management strategy so that you can maximize your profits and limit your losses. Then you can really grind sports betting long-term and turn it, instead of betting, into a long-term investment. Now, first off, when you're setting your bankroll management strategy, what is bankroll? Your bankroll is the amount of money that you've set aside specifically for betting on sports. You can consider it a disposable income, or money that you can basically play with. And you always have to think, and hope for the best, but also be prepared for the worst. So whatever number you come up with, you have to know in your head and be comfortable with the fact that if I lose it all, it won't negatively affect my life. It's also important to be properly funded at the beginning, because the more money you can start off with, then you can be very clear-eyed and approach bets with an open and clear mind, knowing that, okay, I'm not worried about losing. I have enough money to play with so that I can kind of overcome that tough start for all new bettors when they start off with, and I can bet clear-eyed and really try to make money instead of worrying about losing money overall. There are two basic bankroll management strategies. The first is flat betting. Flat betting is a consistent and disciplined long-term approach where you're betting the same amount on every single game, and you're also risking the same percentage of bet on every play as well. So in terms of flat betting, you can look at betting between 1% to 5% of your bankroll per play. So a good medium might be 3% overall. So whatever number you're starting off with, let's say you start off with a bankroll of $1,000, multiply that by 0.03. This means you're betting $30 per game. And one unit for you, your unit size would then be $30 overall. Now, the importance of flat betting is that knowing sports betting, there are ups and downs. You have cold streaks, you have hot streaks. Flat betting keeps you in the game long term. It'll save you from going bankrupt when you're struggling, but also set yourself up for a pretty good return on investment when you're doing well. Flat betting is specifically important for new bettors because it's simple and easy. It can make sure that you are in the game long term so that you're approaching sports betting. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Now, the other important part of flat betting is avoiding parlays. A lot of recreational bettors love betting parlays because you can turn a small amount of money into a big amount by combining more than one bet into the same bet. However, you should avoid parlays in general because they provide a huge edge for the house. The house has a hold percentage, the amount of money they hold on to after all bets have been settled and paid out, of about 30% on parlays versus just about 5% on most major other sports. So the books make a killing off of parlays. They're kind of considered the penny slot of sports betting. And always remember, if you have a 5-team parlay and you go 4-1, you end up losing the entire thing. Whereas if you bet them via flat betting, individually betting each one, you turn a pretty good profit going 4-1. Now, the other bankroll management style available to you would be Kelly Criterion. It was created by J.L. Kelly Jr. in 1956, and it's the opposite of flat betting. Basically, what you do is you weight your plays based on confidence level in order to maximize your profits by risking more if you have a bigger edge. It's used by a lot of sharp bettors, and it can be very successful, but it's also very complicated and it can be very difficult. You have to be really good at math and modeling and using Excel sheets and pivot tables, and you have to be very good at analytics, so you can basically create a model that allows you to find an edge on specific games more than others so that you risk more overall. So always remember, bankroll management strategy is important to stick with it. Grind it long term, but always remember, it's okay to lay off, always be disciplined, but if you maximize your profit and find an edge, it's okay to get down hard.
Okay, it is the Everything Guide to Sports Betting as we welcome you in. It's VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, the author of the Everything Guide to Sports Betting, Josh Appelbaum. We're talking bankroll management today. This is something that is remarkably important if you want to become a better and sophisticated bettor. Of course, we're going to go behind the book with VSiN Vinny, Mr. Vinny Magliulo at the South Point. Can't wait to talk to Vinny and a bettor's perspective. So when we just set it up, Josh, and we say bankroll management, we know what it is, but where do we start?
Yeah, so Patrick, the first thing that you have to start off with when you're talking about your bankroll management strategy is first asking yourself a really critical question. How much money are you willing to lose betting on sports? Because your bankroll overall, if we can just define the term, is the amount of money that you've set aside specifically for betting on sports. So you can consider it your disposable income, basically money that you have to ask yourself, if I lost it all, and you always have to enter betting, hope for the best, but expect the worst. And in that case, you got to make sure that if I start off with a specific bankroll, maybe it's $100, maybe it's 1,000, maybe it's 10,000, maybe it's a million, whatever the number is, you have to first be comfortable with that number. If you lost it all, would that negatively affect your life? If the answer to that question is yes, if that causes you to, cut back on vacations or groceries or miss a car payment, then boom, that's too much money to start off with. So first, come up with a disposable income number for the money that you've set aside for sports betting, and then you also want to make sure that you're properly funded at the beginning, because I think this is really important. If you start off with a really low amount of money, you're just going to be staring at that number, whatever that number is, and it can cloud your vision. So you really want to be clear-eyed. The better funded you can be to start, whether that's $1,000 or whatever number it is always going to make it better for you long term, because instead of focusing on just watching that number go up or down, you're going to instead feel a little more comfortable with some room there to grow. And you got to know, when you first bet on sports, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and you're going to take a lot of lumps early because you're diving into something completely new. So as a result, you just want to make sure you're properly funded and come up with that number, whatever that number means to you. But overall, Patrick, when we're talking about bankroll management, there are two basic strategies that a lot of bettors employ. So the first one is considered flat betting. So what this is, it's very disciplined, it's very straightforward, it's very simple. What you're doing is you're trying to be as disciplined as possible. You're risking the same amount of money on every single game, regardless of your confidence level. And a good medium that I would suggest is between 1% of your bankroll to 5% of your bankroll per play. So you can kind of cut that in half. 3% is kind of a number that I've settled upon throughout the years. But basically, whatever your starting bankroll number is, if you multiply that by 0.03, that now becomes your unit size. So let's say you start off with $1,000 for your bankroll. Multiply that by 0.03, that means you're betting $30 per game. And for you, one unit would be $30. So the whole point of flat betting, and why it's really, really important, especially for new bettors, is that it keeps you alive through the ups and downs. Everyone's going to go through a cold stretch. And the worst thing that can happen is if you start betting for the first time, you lose it all because you bet too much on a couple different games. You're out of the game before you even began. So flat betting is really important because it keeps you in the game long term. And basically, it lets you know that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So every game's the same, that 1 unit per play, and also 3% of your bankroll per play. Now, another point of flat betting, which is crucial, Patrick, is avoiding parlays. That's another key ingredient here, because parlays are a huge advantage to the house. A parlay can hold a hold percentage for the house of about 30% versus a regular sport, which might be around 5%. So betting parlays, it's kind of the penny slot of sports betting. It's hard enough to win one bet. When you bet more and more bets, you really just provide a huge edge to the house. I always give the example of, if you have a 5-team parlay, you go 4-1, you lose the whole thing. But if you were flat betting and bet those games individually, you would have turned a decent profit there. Now, the other side of the coin, aside from flat betting, is Kelly Criterion. So this is basically a formula that was created by J.L. Kelly Jr. back in 1956. He was a scientist at Bell Labs, and he really revolutionized a completely different way of betting on sports, and it's kind of the opposite of flat betting overall. So what you're doing with Kelly Criterion is you're weighing your plays based on your confidence level. The goal is to maximize your profits by risking more if you have a bigger edge on a game. And one big Kelly Criterion supporter would be Warren Buffett. He uses that kind of style when investing. And this is an investment style used by a lot of sharps as well. It can be very successful, but the one thing you got to remember is it's very complicated. You need to be very data driven, very math driven. You have to be an analytics guy who is basically knows his way around modeling and Excel sheets and pivot tables, because you have to create algorithms and formulas for you to be able to weight your plays based on the price of a game and the probability that a team will win or cover. So that's in a more advanced model used by a lot of sharps. Flat betting is kind of the good way to start if you're a brand new bettor, but both options are available to you throughout your sports betting journey.
Okay, a tremendous start to bankroll management from a bettor's perspective. Now let's go behind the book. A gentleman, of course, VSiN, the South Point, almost 40 years of booking here in Vegas. He, of course, is Vinny Magliulo. And as we welcome in Vinny, you can find him at VSiN Vinny on Twitter. You know, we were thinking we want to approach this from two different perspectives, Vinny's. We wanted to go bettor's perspective and the behind the book. And as you and I were talking, there are certain characteristic traits that stand out when it comes to bankroll management between a recreational bettor and a professional bettor.
Yes, good points, guys, and a great start. Good to be with you. What you want to recognize, too, from our side of the counter, and let's remember, there are a lot of new operators now throughout the country that with the expansion of sports wagering around the United States. So one of the things that we certainly pay attention to is who's betting, and not only what they're betting, but who are they betting and when are they betting? Is it at post time? Is it advance? And many professional bettors will bet when numbers first come out. They'll certainly consider what the opening numbers are, because they will make numbers themselves and compare what we post to what their numbers are. Always remember this. Professionals bet numbers or bet prices. They don't bet teams, and that's what's important. From an operator's perspective also, always remember this. Respect everybody's bet. It doesn't matter if someone's a novice or someone is a professional, because they're putting their money up, and so you want to be mindful of that. That said, you're certainly, as an operator, going to put more credence into certain opinions than others in terms of when you will move the line or whether you will move the line or not.
Vinny, thanks so much for taking the time today. It's great to be with you. We had a couple of questions, in the intro to the show. We're talking about kind of two basic strategies for bankroll management. One would be a flat betting approach, a very consistent approach where you're kind of risking the same every single game. You're playing the long-term grind of sports betting. And then you also have kind of your Kelly Criterion way, where basically a lot of sharps will weight their plays based on their confidence level. So just in your experience, can you kind of speak to the two different strategies, maybe the pros and cons of both? And then from behind the book, what kind of tendencies do you see maybe from a recreational bettor versus a sharp bettor?
Yeah, well, I think, here's what the casual bettors, novice bettors will like to do. They like to bet a little to win a lot. So you'll see a lot more casual bettors betting parlay cards, right? Give me my 4-teamers, my 5-teamers, my 10-teamers, and various specials like that. So they enjoy the toothpick for a lumberyard mentality, which is fine as well, because they do come in sometime. And when they do, it encourages them to bet some more. But now the house advantage obviously goes up with parlays, right, Josh, as you've pointed out on many occasions. That said, professionals will not necessarily gravitate towards parlays unless they're correlation parlays, whether it's an underdog to the under, a favorite to the over, and they'll kind of mitigate them, or they'll round robin those in terms of 2s and 3s, not necessarily in groups of 10. They'll typically not bet the same amount in a parlay as novice bettors will. Professional bettors, they actually, they stick to their tried and true way of making money, and that is with straight bets many times. Sometimes, though, too, the biggest difference between casual bettors and professionals is professionals will steer clear. Sometimes there are days, or there are weeks in the case of football, where they will not bet. And sometimes the most important bet is the one that you don't make.
Vinny, I think that's a great point because we'll talk further in the show about kind of just mentalities and tendencies, and discipline is kind of what really separates a new bettor from an experienced bettor overall. But kind of could just take us behind the counter a little bit. I mean, we're talking a lot from a bettor's perspective, but how about a sports book? How do you guys manage, quote unquote, your bankroll? What are some ways that you try to protect yourselves from big liability, or moving a line to make sure you don't get hit hard? How do you kind of flip it to where how a house or a sports book manages their quote unquote bankroll?
Yeah, good question. We don't manage a bankroll. We manage risk, and that's the difference. You, as a bettor, have a bankroll. We manage risk. I would encourage operators out there also to be consistent. If you have a particular bettor that's been successful, that doesn't mean that you should cut them back, right? I mean, you want to be consistent with your practices, with your limits, with your offerings. So that's always worked well for myself, Chris Andrews, Jimmy Vaccaro over the years. What? So let's if you look at let's look at the NFL, the most popular sport there is, closely followed by college football these days. Football numbers go up early in the week, anywhere from Sunday night to Monday morning. So those are the opening numbers, right? Again, professionals will look at those numbers and they will compare them to what they made, and there'll be activity there. So there's a flurry of activity with the openers. Then there's the week goes on and information is coming out. There will be information on practices, certainly injuries and things like that. And this year is going to be a very unique year, right? We're going to be monitoring the COVID-19 situation as it may pertain to not just football but all sports, right? So we have to be very closely in tune with what's happening there. The other thing that helps us, and I mentioned limits. So the sports that have typically have the higher limits are football, right? And then you're followed by basketball, hockey, and baseball. And again, you want to be consistent with your limits as well. Professionals will tend to make more limit plays than casual fans will make limit plays. If you have a $10,000 limit, 11 to win 10 on football, professionals will be more inclined to hit those limits as opposed to the casual fan. Again, going back to what their preference will be, some straight bets and then their parlays. So what helps us is the fact that we've got time on our hands. We'll pay attention to who's making the bet, when they're making the bet, and limits also are there and designed along with line movement to mitigate risk. That's how you manage risk. And by the way, as a bettor, here's a tip from behind the counter. If you're looking for a higher limit, give us time. The further in advance you bet, then the likelihood of your limit being increased is greater, simply because we have more time on our side of the counter to manage that risk.
Again, we're joined by VSiN, at VSiN Vinny on Twitter, Vinny Magliulo, ace bookmaker and sports bettor, sharp to the end, Vinny. But Vinny, I wanted to ask you, I think a big, misconception maybe is that if you bet a lot of money, you have to be sharp. Whereas, if you're betting a small amount, maybe you're definitely a recreational bettor overall. But can you kind of speak to, when you're behind the counter and you see someone, you might have two people place a $10,000 bet or a $5,000 bet. The amount might be the same, but if it's coming from a wise guy, a sharp guy, that's a bet you're going to respect much more than a big amount of money placed by maybe just a fan who has a little extra money and they want to bet their favorite team. So even though maybe the amounts might be the same, you're going to respect one way more than the other.
Well, sure. It's a good point, Josh. And also, it depends on where we are at that particular time in terms of the money. So we've got a lot of bettors these days that are, because the sports wagering has become so much more popular and people realize that it's easier and the odds are more in their favor. The house advantage is obviously less when you're laying 11 to 10 and picking, trying to determine who's going to win a game or cover the point spread, than compared to going up against 36 combinations of the dice on the craps table. So people have become more educated, and with that, even though they may not be a professional bettor, they've increased their bankroll to take a chance at the sportsbook counter. But certainly, if a bettor comes up and he's got a Cleveland Browns jersey on, and he's pumping his arms and he's saying, you know what, I'm going to bet it because I'm a Browns fan, I'll never bet against them, compared to a professional bettor who may be two windows over and who's taking the other side, I know that, and I'm not necessarily going to jump and move the number from, say, 4 to 4.5 on the casual play, because I also know that as soon as I do that, the 4.5 is going to get gobbled by the professional. Now, if I need that money, many times we do, then that's either side. Then I'm gonna manage that risk there. But don't forget, if one of them is betting, they're both betting 11 to win 10. So if one is betting 11,000 on one side and 11,000 on the other, I'm okay with that, because I've got $1,000 profit to the house going in that case, as long as the game doesn't fall 4 in that example.
South Point is certainly lucky to have Vinny Magliulo behind the book, almost 40 years here in Vegas. But we here at VSiN are also lucky to call him a coworker. You can find Vinny Magliulo. That's invaluable information right there at VSiN Vinny on Twitter. Thanks for the time, Vin. We appreciate you.
Great to
Thank
be
you,
with
Vin.
you guys. Best to everybody out there.
Okay, there he is, Vinny Magliulo. Good to see his face, and invaluable information, Josh, when it comes to bankroll management. You know, we were talking about the parlays, and I was going to joke with Vinny. You say avoid them for the better. He welcomes them. And, you know, I know a lot of professionals that treat parlay bets as entertainment, as fun, and they completely separate that from their standard bankroll.
Yeah, and I think what I love about this show so much, Patrick, is that we bring both sides to the table: the bettor's perspective, the bookmaker's perspective. And if you're a new bettor, especially, you know, hearing from Vinny can be so invaluable, because just like you mentioned, Patrick, you know, we try to educate new bettors and let them know, okay, parlays are great. And I think Vinny hit the nail on the head. As a new bettor, you want to turn a little bit of money into a lot of money. However, why do Vinny and the bookmakers love it and love taking in those parlays? Because they know that it provides them a huge hold percentage and a huge advantage to the house. So just a great example. Listen to the bookmakers. You can pick up on a lot of tendencies. You can pick up on a lot of good insight that can help you down the road.
Tremendous start here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. Coming up next, Bankroll Builder on Bankroll Management. We'll get to that as we continue along. It is the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. It's VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Bankroll Builder coming up next. Okay, of course, it is the Everything Guide to Sports Betting right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We go back to the basics, betting 101, and we love it here as we go Bankroll Builder. Okay, Bankroll Builder, of course, the principles of sports betting here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. And today we're talking maybe the most important tenet there is, and that is bankroll management, Josh.
Yeah, so builder, Patrick, you know, what's really, really important is that, and again, a lot of new bettors kind of ignore this and just don't think about it, is, you know, if you really want to win at sports betting long term, obviously you want to be have a disciplined bankroll management plan. However, part of that isn't just deciding, okay, what's my starting bankroll? You know, what's my unit size? This is my approach long term. The other part of that is making sure that you track all of your bets. This is really, really important. It's some of the best advice I got a long time ago. But basically, you got to think of it as, you know, a new bettor, they're going to judge their bankroll or their performance just based on their bank account and their sportsbook accounts. You know, if it was higher than the previous day, they're happy, they made money. If it's lower, that's bad. It means they lost money. However, it's critically important to track and document every bet that you make. Now, why is this important? Because really you can add a lot of color and learn a lot about yourself as a bettor and gain much more insight into basically who you are as a bettor, what plays you gravitate to, what plays you struggle at, what sports are your strong suit versus sports that you know, you have a lot of problems with. Overall, you can also learn, okay, I'm betting a ton of volume in one sport and I'm doing terribly. In another sport, I'm betting a low amount of bets, but I'm doing pretty well overall. So being able to audit your performance at any time is really, really important. So what I like to do is, you know, depending on the style of who you are as a bettor, It doesn't really matter the method. Some guys old school use a notebook. It's tedious, but if that works for you, all the power to you. Other guys, computer type people, they like an Excel sheet. I prefer a bet tracking app. To me, that's kind of the easiest way. You can search the app store, and there's tons of different ways to just literally submit your bet, the line you got it on, your unit size, and it'll keep a running list of how you're doing overall. But really, the key with documenting your plays is learning your strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, maybe you are in college basketball, you're doing decent overall, but you're actually, once you learn a little bit more and you break down your plays, you find out, okay, I'm terrible with spreads. I'm down 10 units, but my totals in college basketball, I'm up 20 units. So, I thought I was doing, kind of decent at both, but you learn more about yourself. Then you can lean on that bet type that you're better at. Another thing you can find out is, okay, maybe Major League Baseball. I realized, man, I'm betting 10 games a day for 6.5 months, 7 months. What does that do? I can never get an edge because I'm betting so many games. It's chipping away at my bankroll. So that's really, really important. Document all of your bets. This is a critical aspect of bankroll management. It allows you to not only keep track of your bankroll, but also understand who you are as a bettor, learn your strengths and weaknesses, and then lean on your strengths and maybe limit or work on them more to try to bring them up to speed.
And I just want to point out, because Josh and Jacob do a great job with the information here. If you're a learner that learns visually, we have all this information bullet pointed right here on the screen. Just go to vsin.com. You can see all the information, of course, as you follow along. It is the everything guide to sports betting. When talking about bankroll management and bankroll builder here, Josh, how can buying picks affect that?
Yeah, great question, Patrick. Because for a lot of new bettors, you'll think, man, there's a lot of sharp guys out there. They're selling their picks. They're telling me they win at a 90% rate. I'll just buy their picks and I'll make money myself. I don't have to do the work. I can just take their plays, bet them myself. I'll make a ton of money. However, really, really caution a lot of new bettors. Try not to buy picks. Avoid them if you can. There are some good handicappers out there who basically do a good job, document their plays, win at a high rate. However, there are a lot of, kind of what we call touts or scam decappers out there who basically are very unreliable. They kind of act like a used car salesman. They'll kind of rope you in with big promises and talk about how they're an expert, but really, they just don't have that documented success. And really, they don't care too much about winning their plays. It's more that you buy those picks. Once you buy the picks, those touts have already won. So big thing with avoiding parlays, this kind of the other side of that is don't buy picks, because even if you buy it from a good capper who wins at a high rate, whatever the cost of that pick package is, maybe it's $500, you're already 500 in the hole. So avoid buying picks overall. You're going to thank yourself later, and devote that time to becoming a more sharper sports bettor yourself. That's going to really improve.
Okay, market factors coming up next here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. Let me ask you a question. Are you emotional? That can affect your bankroll. Are you a drinker? That can definitely, especially with in-game wagering, that can affect your bankroll. And how many bets should you make during a given day? Josh will explain. That's coming up next right here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. It's VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Now's the time to become a VSiN Plus subscriber, because it's free. You won't have to decide what to do, pay or cancel until at least one of the major sports returns. So just go to vsin.com/subscribe to sign up. It's now time for market factors here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. Today's conversation is vital. We're talking about bankroll management. Now comes market factors. And this is a question that's often asked, and this is a personal one, obviously. But at the same time, volume bettors are rampant. And then those are people that are very selective and choosy and picky about how many times they bet during a given day. Let's start here talking bankroll management, Josh Appelbaum, the author of the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. How about limiting your bets? How many bets are you making in a day?
Yeah, so Patrick, and this is a really important segment here because these are a lot of questions that just a lot of new bettors need answers to because it's really, really important because, the number of bets you make can really influence on whether or not you're a successful bettor or not. So, we could call this kind of emotional factors as well because emotion can really play into it as well. But when you're talking about the number of bets you want to make each day, this can be subjective. There's no clear answer like you got to bet, 5 or less or 10 or less, but kind of the one thing you want to keep in the back of your head is that you want to limit your bets to the games where you have the biggest edge on overall. You never want to bet a game just because you want action or you want entertainment. And remember that there's nothing wrong with laying off. Sports betting, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If you come home from work, you had a bad day at work, you want to kind of escape reality and bet on a game, all the power to you. But if you don't have a good edge on that game, you're really kind of walking into a buzzsaw in that specific situation. So kind of what I always go to is, Wayne Gretzky always said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But that doesn't really apply to betting. When you miss a shot as a hockey player, there's no consequence. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you take a shot in betting and you miss, you lose hard-earned money. So again, only get down in a game if you have a specific edge. And I always look at it, Patrick, in terms of a glass of wine. You and I joke about this a lot, but one glass of wine a night, nothing wrong with that. But if you have 10 or more a night, that's when you can really start to get into some trouble. So, kind of a number that I throw out there to a lot of new bettors is, try to make 5 or less bets per night. Even that can be a little bit high overall. You got to remember what separates, new bettors from sharp bettors is the fact that if they don't see an edge at all, they have no problem laying off and they may only bet one game a night, 2 games a night. Now, the other side of that is that, once you start betting more and more games, that's kind of the quickest way to get in trouble as a new bettor. Betting too many plays, that is really kind of the quickest to go bankrupt. Not only because the more games you bet, basically you're allowing the juice to chip away at your winnings, you're assuming more risk, you're playing right into the sports book's hands, but also you can spiral into gambling addiction. It's a real thing, and kind of just the sweat of a game is very addicting, and it's so much fun, and you want more and more and more of it. But that can be extremely dangerous and get you in a bad situation that you don't want to be in. So try to limit your plays overall. I think another thing is don't let bias and emotion and recent performance kind of blind your vision overall, because a big thing is, with a lot of new bettors, when they're losing, what do they want to do? They want to chase. So what does that
Yep.
mean? You're going to try to bet more and more to recoup all your losses, but don't ever chase. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. All you're going to dig yourself a deeper and deeper hole. You should always go into a bet, whether you won or lost your previous bet, with a clear mind. It's easier said than done, but last bet affect your new bet. But also, when you're winning, that can be a bad thing too, because you become overconfident, you get cocky, you feel invincible, you start doubling down and betting more and more. We all have hot streaks, just as we all have cold streaks, but you never want to be too overconfident, because in the end, if you're doing well, you're never as good as your high water mark. You're also never as bad as your low water marks. This is why that even keeled approach can be very important. But also, when you're losing, you can also get scared and want to lay off. It's completely, it's a human emotion that it makes total sense. But, scared money don't make no money, Patrick. And when you're scared, the one thing you want to do is, I'm going to stop betting. But you can also forfeit value by not getting down on a game just because you're scared or you've been losing lately. So another thing is, adjusting your bankroll. This is something that's really important as well. Once you pick a bankroll management strategy, maybe it's flat betting, maybe it's more Kelly Criterion. Whatever you do, stick with it. You don't want to continue to adjust your bankroll every day, every week, even every month, because there are a lot of ups and downs in sports betting. So kind of what you want to do is just pick a strategy, stick with it, grind that strategy long term. And then I would suggest, a good time to adjust and assess your bankroll is kind of once per year during the summer. You kind of consider the summer bettor's vacation. It's when a lot of the major sports have died down. Really, only baseball's going on. Maybe around July, early August, when you're getting ready for football. So what I would suggest is see how you've done over the last 9 or so months. If in September, Patrick, you started with $1,000, you're a flat bettor, you're betting $30 a game, you're now up to $1,500. Okay, readjust your bankroll. you'll still do that, multiply it by 0.03, that 3%. But now, since you went from 1,000 to 1,500, you can now up moving forward your unit size from $30 a game to $45 a game. Now, on the flip side, let's say you started with 1,000 back in September. You had some bad beats, you struggled a little bit, you took some losses, but you learned from them. And basically, you went from 1,000 down to 500. You would then adjust your bankroll, same thing, multiply it by 0.03. You're now decreasing your unit size from $30 a game down to $15 a game. So long story short, market factors, make sure that you are trying to limit your bets only to the games that you have an edge on. Never be afraid of laying off. There will always be another game to bet on. And don't let your recent performance blind you or talk you into a bad bet or talking you to betting more or holding off and betting less or doubling down. Never chase. And then make sure that you can adjust your bankroll during that downtime in the summer to set you up for hopefully a big year ahead.
Bottom line, betting is an emotional pursuit. And last time I checked, you're a human being. And so you have certain condition traits. Okay. So betting is a character trait revealer. It's going to shine a spotlight on both the good and bad of your characteristics. So, in concert with betting, what I always tell people is it's a wonderful time to tether becoming a better human, getting better sleep, having better routines. You take a look at your budget in real life. That's going to be indicative or mirror your bankroll as far as a bettor. So if you're slovenly, if you're sloppy, if you're being reckless with money over here, you're not going to become a fastidious bettor and a bankroll manager over here, Josh.
Yeah, it's a great point, Patrick. And kind of like you said, it's a magnifying glass. If you're more of a conservative type person with your finances, maybe that benefits you in sports betting because you can just grind that, 1% per play. If you like to take more risks, maybe that could be a dangerous thing as well. But again, all of these tips are tips. They're much easier said than done. But I think just being aware of these factors and knowing when you're walking into a pitfall, that can really benefit you long term.
Okay, looking forward to this conversation. A friend of Josh's, a very sharp man, Jak Slade of Advantage Analytics, is going to join us next, right here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. It's VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Okay, we're talking bankroll management here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. It's VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, and we're thrilled about our next guest, Jak Slade of Advantage Analytics, a three-time finalist at the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. I'm going to let Josh get at you, Jake, but I just want to start here. We're talking bankroll management. The concept of bankroll management means what to you?
Being able to have an economically justified level of betting that avoids risk of losing and raises the probability of winning and payoffs. Emphasize payoffs.
Love it.
Well, Jake, this is great to have you on. There's so many ways we can go in this one, but I met Jake at the Sloan Analytics Conference a couple of years ago. We had a great conversation about bankroll management. So, Jake, I just wanted to ask you, just kind of set the table. You're a big analytics guy. How do you use analytics to your advantage, and how do you select games? Can you walk us through kind of the analytics you look at, maybe using MLB, baseball as an example? How do you identify a smart bet?
Well, first of all, baseball is my forte. That's the one I cut my teeth on and really enjoy the most. The first step that has to be taken is figuring out the probability of winning. Now, we have a couple of clues, and one of the things is the money line. For instance, if there's a line of minus 110, that translates into a probability of winning, including the juice, about 50% or 53% if you remove the juice. So getting the probability of winning is the first and foremost step. And I use 5 different methods for calculating the probability of winning. And then I look at some other parameters that I find important. In particular, on-base percentage plus slugging is one of the most accurate in terms of correlation with winning. In fact, if you look at the differences between the two teams, OPS actually correlates more with winning than does scoring. So there, another one is the strikeouts per base on balls. So those are some of the key measures that I do in terms of building my models.
And again, we're joined by Jak Slade of Advantage Analytics. And Jak, I wanted to talk to you in terms of bankroll management overall. Can you kind of talk us through the advantages of a Kelly Criterion sports betting, sports management strategy, where you are coming up with basically your unit size on betting a game based on your confidence level, and it's just not confidence in terms of emotion; it's confidence based on hard data. So, how do you come up with your weighted system for betting on a play? When do you know you should bet more on a game versus maybe less on another?
Well, that's that's what betting's all about. The first thing I do is I build a model where I include my 5 measures of probability of winning. The Kelly criteria includes the probability of winning as well as the payoff. And there's another measure I use, which was done. I forget the gentleman. The book Trading Bases goes into an exponential form, and there's a third way of using the edge, which is the difference between the probability of winning and the line's implied probability of winning. So I actually include all. How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 different measures that I use in determining the magnitude. Then I go back into history and I plug those things in and find out what works. I use an optimization algorithm that determines that, which actually determines the percentage of bankroll I want to invest. And one of the beauties of it is, as the bankroll increases, you increase the amount of your betting. So that, in a nutshell, is what I do with each and every game. And overall, we only bet on between 15 and 20% of the games that actually can meet all of our criteria.
Joe Peta is the author of Trading Bases, which Jak just mentioned, which is a tremendous book. We're talking to Jak Slade. I just have a quick follow-up. Jak, Josh tells me you have an aversion to flat betting. Is this true?
Yes, I define flat betting as simply, an avenue where you can lose. If you want to bet and make use of flat betting, you're not going to capitalize on the differences in the lines. Now, flat betting is okay in the areas of over and unders, where you're basically talking a 50-50 kind of bet, or in pro football where you're talking about, giving points and that sorts with the line. So those two cases, flat betting is okay. But in the money line, generally, you can find where there are discrepancies and major discrepancies between the probability of winning and the calculated probability of winning. And then some of the lines get out of line. But we know that the free marketplace gives us clues by giving us the line every morning and throughout the day until the games are played.
And Jak, I highly recommend any of our VSiN listeners to check out Jak's paper from the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. It's called Better Up. And Jak, I wanted to ask you, kind of a great tagline that you told me was "Picking winners is for losers." I think that might sound a little crazy, but there's a lot of thought behind it. Can you talk to what you mean by "picking winners is for losers"?
Yeah, if you just worry about picking a winner, you're going to pick something that has the highest probability of winning. That's the definition of picking a winner, that you go where the highest probability of winning is. But there are gaps in the system where the underdog may seem to be a lower probability of winning, but the expected value of return on that investment is very, very high. So if you were to just pick going out picking for winners, you'd always pick the favorite and you'd never make any money. The point is to identify the gaps where the lines are misaligned with the realities of picking the probability of winning. It is that probability of winning that kickstarts what's going on.
And Jak, could you give some tips maybe to some new bettors who would love to do what you're doing? I think ideally we would all love to have such advanced mathematics backgrounds that we can create our own models and kind of set our own rated plays, increase our chances of winning. But kind of what was your educational background? How did you get into sports betting? And if someone's listening to you and man, this guy's really smart. I want to do what he's doing. How do they get into it in terms of what should they focus on? An Excel sheet, pivot. How do they do what you do?
Well, everything I do is done on an Excel spreadsheet. My background is I have an undergraduate degree in math and economics from Purdue, and then I have an MBA with a major in quantitative methods from Northwestern. And I just apply the math that I learned. I first started out doing optimal batting order, which was a fascinating exercise, and was doing some of the work in the early days for the Cubs. And one of my buddies said, "Hey, if you're so smart about all this baseball, can you tell me who's going to win the game?" And of course I said, "That's impossible, but I figure I can tell you the probability of winning the game." And that's where it started about 15 years ago. So that's how I got into it, is actually doing some work for Major League Baseball teams in terms of game day player selection and optimizing batting order. But it's all applied mathematics, and that's what the key is. And you really got to love this stuff, because believe me, I went down an awful lot of blind alleys. This stuff doesn't pop up at you, and you got to try things. And I hate to say trial and error is really a goal, but man alive, you can really find some mistakes in what you do in the avenues that you pursue that don't lead you anywhere, except don't want to go there again.
Well, I'd like to start by having your intellect and your temperament. That is Jak Slade of Advantage Analytics, 3-time finalist at the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. By the way, we are going to put up the download for Better Up, the MIT paper from Jak. We're going to make sure we have the link associated with the show as well. Jak, I just want to thank you very much for the time tonight. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Enjoyed talking about my favorite subject.
We enjoyed
Thanks,
listening.
Jak.
I feel smarter after talking to Jak. I'm not going to lie. And the importance of OPS, that is something in baseball betting. I'm so glad that Jak pointed that out. And that's advanced as far as bettors are concerned. But for a novice bettor, you wouldn't think OPS. But that's something that I know a lot of professional bettors, when approaching and attacking baseball, really like to look at. And that is the specific stat of OPS. Okay, that was great. I'd like an opportunity to meet him as well. That's a pretty sharp guy, huh, Josh?
He's the sharpest. Yeah, he really blew my mind at the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. We both love baseball. We love betting on it, but Jak is light years ahead of me. I learned so much from him overall. But yeah, Patrick, we're kind of just wrapping up today's show and looking at the journal for today. We talked about bankroll management and looking at, first off, making sure that you can define your bankroll. That's the number one thing. Where do you start? You got to start with coming up with a number, a disposable income number that you're willing to risk, knowing that if you lose it all, it's not going to negatively affect your life overall. So once you come up with that number, that now becomes your bankroll, and now you can devise a strategy long term to decide, okay, how much am I going to bet on a game? You can go flat betting, a consistent discipline approach where you're risking the same every day. You're grinding long term. You're avoiding parlays. Or there's the Kelly Criterion model, popularized by J.L. Kelly back in 1956, which is what Clay talked about. If you have the advanced degrees and know how to kind of create the modeling to give you a confidence level, that's a great way to maximize your win losses over time. But also, looking at our bankroll builder segment. We're looking at the importance of tracking all of your bets. We also talked to Vinny Magliulo from Behind the Book. I think what Vinny talked about, which is really important, is how books are, the sports bettor wants to manage their bankroll. The book wants to manage their risk overall. And I think Vinny gave the great example of, a Cleveland Browns fan wearing his Cleveland Browns jersey. He could bet the same amount as an obscure guy who isn't bringing any attention, but you're going to really weigh, that sharp play much more than that recreational bettor overall. Then we talked about, what to avoid, how parlays can really be killer for your bankroll. There are situations you can make money, but overall it's a huge advantage to the book. Also trying to avoid buying picks from touts, from handicappers. You're already behind the 8 ball and you don't know how successful they are. Then market factors, limit your bets, try to be disciplined. Don't bet based on emotion. Don't chase. Know that you can adjust your bankroll once a year, usually during the summer. And then Jak Slade, be a sharp guy, and the proponents of Kelly Criterion.
Talk to you next time right here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting. It's VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.